Radio OKiTALK, Radio OKiTALK, von Mensch zu Mensch.
Here we are, The Wizard of Oz with Bryan, Lahr, episode 8. Today, magic squares.
What's up, Raphael? Good to be back. It's really fun. Magic Square is one of my favorite topics. Can't wait.
Yeah, actually, I've been kind of requesting this, so I'm super curious. Basically, take us away. What can this be?
Okay, well, magic squares are integral into. The thing I love about them is that lots of magical systems have developed and things have come out in different parts of the world. When populations were separated, it wasn't so easy to be connected. Things would develop around the population and the culture where it was. So there are lots of different methodologies to achieve the same thing. But magic squares, because they're based, well, first of all, what is a magic square? A magic square is a square that's divided into different numbers of little squares inside. The most simple one looks like a tic-tac-toe board. It's 9 squares, 3 on a side. And what makes a magic square is when you add the numbers across the rows horizontally, vertically, and diagonally, and they all add up to the same number. In mathematics, it's a real, that's kind of like a big area of exploration, coming up with new ones, which I enjoy attempting myself, although that's not particularly easy. And the most simple ones, I've included the 3x3 planetary squares, which are the most simple planetary squares on my tarot deck, and use those to generate sigils based on what I got out of my readings. And it's curious, the first magic square I was introduced to was the square that it's called in Western magic, the Square of Saturn. It's 429 357 816, and in every direction that adds up to 15, which also happens to be my soul number. So that was kind of like a little lightning bolt for me when I discovered that, and caused me to dive in deeper. And the planetary square for Saturn, curiously enough, kind of transcends cultural boundaries all over the world. As a matter of fact, the earliest known show up of the Saturn Square was in China, and the myth story for it goes that the emperor was sitting on the side of a river and watched a turtle climb up out of the water and up the bank. And as he was sitting there looking at the turtle's shell, he realized that it had little dots, like you do geometry, in each of the plates on the back of the turtle, and there were 9 of those. So he wrote that down, and that became what's called the Loshu Magic Square. And that was about 2,500 years ago. And in China, the Loshu Magic Square is integral in Feng Shui. They do the Feng Shui masters use that to locate things in the room and set up energy flows in the space, and it's really integral to that. It's also integral to their brand of magic, and it is also one of the cornerstones of Sun Tzu's Art of War. And many of his military strategies were all based off of using the Loshu Magic Square. So that has just always fascinated me, that how those things came around independently, because the earliest show up uh, of the square they call the Saturn Square happened independently in Agrippa's old work, and there were a few little pieces that were before that, but that's mainly when that came to a forefront, and those squares represent a graphic frequency of a spiritual entity or frequency itself. And by using combinations of those things, it makes it really easy to access the line of juice with whatever that planetary energy is. And so those have been around for a really, really, really long time. But where they kind of came into popularity these days in modern times was with the chaos magicians. I was talking about chaos magic the other day, and somebody was like, wow, no, how could you want to be doing something that brings chaos to the world? No. It's not about chaos in the world. The thing that I've always attached to about chaos magic, and kind of like if hard pressed, I would say I was a chaos magician, is because, especially at the time of Carol and Spare, they were in a world where it was all the lodges and like all the magical communities were very much about dogma and ritual and this mindset that whatever way they were practicing was the only way to make things happen. Everything else was just a sham, that was the answer. So in rebellion to that, the chaos magicians will use anything and everything available to them at the time. If you don't have a magic wand, you find a stick on the ground, or you use your finger, or that's also, I talked last time about how there's a whole magical system in the palm of your hand, and that's where a lot of those ideas were generated as well. And I first got into the practical usage of sigils about 25 years ago. And it was through Austin Osman Spare, one of the most, he's sort of the guy that brought chaos magic back to kind of some popularity and got a bunch of people cruising on it. And the thing I love about his mindset about it is he's an artist. So he brought this like technical construct with the numbers in the square and applied that to his magical artwork, which I've always just been really, really fascinated with. And, his main use for planetary squares is creating sigils. And, to me, sigils are really the basis of my brand of magic now. And, Spare's version of that was the simplest form of that. And a sigil is created by, you take the Saturn Square. It's a square. It has on the top row 492. The middle row is 357, and the bottom row is 816. So Spare's method was, take whatever thing that you want to have happen and focus your intent and generate a sentence, a single sentence, not a paragraph, that would, to the best of your ability, describe what you are looking to have manifest. And for me, I don't use these simple ones for really big things, but I use them for everyday stuff. Like, I need to pay some bills or just having a really good time somewhere. And they just work so good and so fast. And so you take that sentence that you've you know, my desire, my need for $500, and you write that out in sentence form, and then you go through that sentence and you cross out any letters that duplicate. So if there's more than one T, you cross out all the T's. If there's more than one O, you cross out all the O's. Go through the whole sentence and cross out everything until you're left with a sequence of characters that are singular, that don't repeat. And then using the Pythagorean method of numerology, you assign numbers to those letters, and then those numbers then correspond to positions on the planetary square. So to draw a sigil, you would start at the first letter, draw a little open circle, and then without breaking the line, you draw from that number to each of the numbers, making a line, and the figure that you get at the end of that is a sigil. And it represents a focused intent. And what needs to happen now that the intent is distilled and down into a really perfect little piece of information, then you need to charge that and launch it off. And that's one of my favorite uses for my projective abilities, is being able to see that sigil, make a little energy construct that I can see, and fill that up with energy and just keep juicing it up until it just, for me, because my main energy flow is blue, it'll wind up just looking like hot metal that's glowing blue with little veins of dark blue running through it. And once I got it nice and crackly like that, I'll spin it. I like, I didn't mention that when the very, you're charging that, and that's sort of suspended in space right in front of me. So once I have it really charged up, I start to spin it. And that's where, like, the rod, that spinning the rod thing, that exercise, that's where that comes in super handy for this. Because you start spinning that sigil and spinning it until it's just, an oval blur of motion. And once that's spinning like that, then you push it out and launch it out into the universe. And usually with things like, I need $500, that'll show up in a few days. And it's really fast and really fun. And making those sigils is a really resonant process for me. My psyche just loves that process. It's like, it's funny, you gravitate towards things that resonate with you, and numbers have always been a fascination for me, like from a small child. So finding a magical system that actually works like that is beyond cool to me. So the sigils, those are the most simple parts of creating a sigil. It's interesting, going back, Spare's way, one of his ways of charging his sigils was using a sexual orgasm. And, I tried that a few times, but the headspace that I get into when I'm like in sex mode and thinking about an orgasm is, it's not exactly the without taint to it, So I actually, I never use that system anymore. But I do know a couple people, especially some guys I know in the OTO, that like that method very much. And the key to that is to be able to achieve zero space or neutrality when you're at that explosion, so that the energy, all of the energy, is driving the intent with purity and clarity, rather than being filtered through some other desire, which is what I've never really been able to achieve with that. But there are people that can. And, that method I used for many, many years, and then started discovering some other ways of expanding that. And all of the planets have larger planetary squares. Like the sun has a 6x6 planetary square, and that which is commonly referred to in Western magic as a kamea, and it also has a seal that's associated with it. And the kamea is used to open things up and launch your request, and then the seal in that mindset is used to close everything down and shut it off. And it's funny, the big planets like Jupiter and Saturn, like Saturn is a 9 square 3x3. The moon is a 9 square 81 square magic square. So if you're moving your energy up to wanting to do a more complex version, I generally use a combination of the larger squares, just because they seem to have a little more juice and a little more focus on that the energetic frequency of the planet. So those wind up being really, really valuable, really useful. And then once you really master the art of creating those single sigils like that, then you can start doing multiple sigils for long-term things and create energy constructs. And if something has 20 parts, you can create an individual sigil for each of those parts, and then glue those together electromagnetically, and then that becomes a complete construct that then goes out and works in a multiplicity of things at one time. And all of those pieces are driving individual specific pieces of it, so that you can go back in later and check your progress. If it's something that's going to take a year or a year and a half, 6 months, you can launch it off and let it go to work, and start checking on it along the way. And if there's things that need to get nudged, you can replace one of the pieces, or you can add pieces to it. It's my go-to way of working these days, and I've practiced at it for so long that I don't really have to sit down and make a thing about it anymore. It's just kind of like talking, and I can make my constructs really, really fast. And for me, with all the people running around inside my head with voices and their opinions about stuff, it really helps me shut down and get to pure singularity of intent, which in my experience in life, it seems like when I get to that zone is when things are effective. And when I can't really reach that zone, that's when things get a little skewy and can go kind of wonky. So making a sigil, you can do it just on a once every blue moon kind of scenario. But if you include it in your daily practice, it winds up being a very rich and useful tool for navigating through the world. Any questions, Raphael?
Well, what I would just mention about the idea of chaos magic, probably, most likely actually, you're familiar with Discordianism, and I eventually...
Absolutely.
So Hail Eris. So eventually I actually got the book from a dear friend and read it finally, even less than a year ago. And there it's really well laid out, this whole idea and understanding that there is order and there is chaos as neutral constructs or ideas. And then there is, let us say, destructive chaos and constructive chaos, just as there is, in a sense, constructive order and destructive order. And also on the shows we do right here, also with Jim on Team Rabbit Hole and different other shows, of course, always this dichotomy or this polarity comes in, order and chaos, or positive and negative. However, then it's really interesting to also realize that it is not that order itself is necessarily positive, and there's even the idea that an excess of order, and this also comes, as I understand, from several channeled sources and also fields, is just kind of obvious, even with all the movies we have or all the systems we have, that in a sense, a too high degree of order almost is more prone even to destructive than having quite some chaos, if the chaos is intentionally positive. So it's a really interesting dynamic that may also put a different spin on this idea of chaos magic, because as you mentioned, it's also just about once again becoming your own initiate and not believing you have to rely on an external source in terms of what permission slips can be useful for each and every one.
Yeah, exactly. And it's you know, I pull from my Afro-Cuban learnings. I pull from my thelemic learnings. I make my own up. That's another thing about the planetary squares is creating your own alphabet and your own squares. Because if you think about the Lahr square, the Saturn square, that's been used for thousands of years now. And if you think about how integral that symbol is to so many disciplines in just China, that's billions of people who have used that and poured energy into that, which can be useful. And I'm not saying that's bad, but as I've progressed and wanted to keep moving things along and improving along the way, I've come to really love the purity of energy that hasn't been used by anyone else for anything else, and that initial time that you're using it is the only thing that's ever been applied to. And I love that. And the creation of your own alphabet, I've got 3 now that I've done, and they're really very cool. I did a 6x6 square, I did an 8x8 square, and I did a 9x9 square. And I use all of those frequently, and some independently and in conjunction with each other. And it's been that, that I love the things where it brings art and technique into play together, and having the rational thought to be able to construct a whole alphabet in combination with the art of creating new characters that don't borrow any derivative structure from anything else. That's kind of like the art part of it for me. And as an artist, you're always trying to come up with something unique, new to you and possibly new to other people. And so that's been really, really fun. The chaos scenario, again, the thing I love the most about that whole philosophy is the use of whatever is available to you, that you're in a magical microcosm that every plant, every board, the street outside, your car, crayons, it doesn't matter. Every single one of those gets shaped by not the object itself, you know. And I run into a lot of people that think that the objects themselves are the things that run that. Like they have to have a specific atami, you know, that like if I don't have my atami, I can't do magic. Well, that's crazy. That's just not correct, you know. If you don't have your atami, then you can use your middle finger, or you can use a butter knife, or you know, the thing about the chaos magic is that the magic comes from your energy and your intent, not the outside tools that you're using. It's that the outside tools that you're using are just aids and help you you know, add focus to whatever you're working on, but they're not the magic themselves, you know. It's like a sage stick. You can wave a sage stick around in your house, but if you haven't charged it up with your intent to clean the house before you do it, it's just a bunch of smelly smoke in your house. It doesn't really have much of an effect. So, you know, that's kind of like one of my core beliefs, is that it's not the actual ritual itself. It's not the specificity. Man, I have one friend that's a purist, and if the hand positions aren't exactly right, and the exact incense isn't used, and like it's like he doesn't want to do it, you know. And that's kind of antithetical to my approach to it. You know, one of the other amazing ways to use sigils is to create music with sigils and the squares. And I generally I try to write a song a day just to stay up on my chops and be moving into new areas all the time. And so I'm always constructing songs to use to get me jacked up before I go out to practice at night. And music is just this, I think it's the best way to charge up for me. You know, because music transcends the intellect and goes right to your emotions and your energy content. And when you listen to a song that just like, ooh, gives you goosebumps, and you get like, wow, I just love that, you know, and it really resonates with you. I find that, you know, I used to spend, wow, a while, hour or two sometimes, charging up to do whatever I was gonna go accomplish. So I was sure I had enough juice. But now it's like you can put a song on that you just know takes you there, and in 2 or 3 minutes you're like crackly and levitating off the floor. It's really, really fun. So I've been constructing, once I get my sigil constructed, say it's a singular sigil, I love taking the numbers of the sigil that you distilled from your intent line and applying those numbers. Those numbers will have a corresponding musical note. So like 492 would be an F, a D, and then another lower octave D, which is a beautiful, beautiful chord, you know. And I love then taking people's names and playing the intrinsic musical sequence in everybody's name. And you would think that it would be kind of dissonant and weird in places, but it's really rare for me to find that, actually. And I've done hundreds, maybe thousands over a long decades quest of doing this. And you know, it's one of my favorite ways to launch the sigils, because as that's playing, you're actually getting a sonic frequency of the same projective frequency that you're using. And the combo of those just very, very effective for me.
Yeah, so of course, music is always great, and it's also so interesting to me what individuals resonate with what music. But it's just like you mentioned, the beautiful thing about the whole sigil creation is that even if for whatever reason one may not find oneself to be supremely inspired or graphically artistic genius, you can just use all the symbols, which, by the way, anyhow you created if all consciousness is one, but anyhow you have alphabets and letters already existing in symbols, or even just, letters and words, just as you described how these sigils are created. And then you kind of just have them mashed together in your head, then just sit down, make a drawing of whatever sigil you wanted to, as I understand, with just one stroke, basically. So one continuous, that's one way to do it, at least.
Yeah, yes.
And then definitely, I mean, even for me, and I would have said, I'm not the most artistic on that level in terms of being able to draw some beautiful shapes or whatever, but still what shows up then is pretty interesting. Like if you can write or whatever, you can do that. And it's pretty cool what shows up. And I actually haven't used that in particular in quite a long time. But just now remember, I had even been using this, I believe, even potentially before we connected. I'm not entirely sure, but I used a few of those and I had mentioned they were quite effective. And I think I'm going to go for another round of a maybe more expanded, complex version of it. But it's just great fun. It's an artistic project. And then,
if I can make a suggestion, do something that requires a couple of them, like
exactly.
there's so that you can start your construction, because there's a couple steps along, like learning how to glue those together took a minute for me, but that's a really critical part. And when you start getting 2 or 3 or 4 of them together, woo, really, really cool. Sorry to interrupt you.
Right, exactly. So, this is of course then how now I've lost my train of thought, but that's perfectly fine. So, but basically,
sorry about that.
It's fine. Just this, this combination of, in a sense, this artistic approach and this kind of logical approach. And it's just a nice exercise. Yeah. And that's the thing, because you mentioned about revisiting. The interesting part here, maybe what I heard in a sense, is that you create it, you look at it, or that's how I read about it, maybe even from Dolores Ashcroft Novicky, maybe in Creation of Magical Thought Forms. Maybe that was the book, but I'm not exactly sure. That they mentioned that then, so you meditate on it and you do all this, whatever exercise, whether it's with, let's say, sexual creative energy, mental focus, or, whatever permission slip you want to use. And then I believe they say, actually, you're kind of supposed to burn it, or you have to forget about it or leave it aside.
Yes, and that's correct. Yeah.
This, of course, would relate also to many other, let's say, spiritual guidelines in terms of if you want to focus on anything, or let's say accelerate the manifestation of any idea or intention, then of course you can build that up, but then eventually it's quite relevant to let that go. Bashar would always say then, well, have no particular expectation, and don't hold too tightly onto it in that sense. Allow your higher self basically to do the manifestation for you, because in my view as well, of course, your ego self or your waking self isn't really able to do anything anyhow. It can just communicate and resonate with its own higher aspect, where in which this type of sigil idea, and also I am pretty certain the idea of, graphical representations overall, because this is a right brain based idea in terms of graphical understanding, overall speaking, that can then just provide potentially a shorter circuit to your own higher self through the symbolic understanding. And then I would say there is this double idea of letting it go. Then also, of course, it could be revisited. In my case, I even just left it hanging. So I put it on in my room basically, and left it there for quite some time. And just also as a reminder for myself, like what is my actual intention, like what is actually relevant to me. And at least those, there were 3 or 4 I initially created, they manifested 100% because I just stuck to the intention and acted accordingly as well. But also got great gifts from the universe, certainly. So it's, yeah.
Well, I totally agree. Whenever I'm doing a short term scenario, I always that mindset. That was sparers mode. Charge it up and then forget you did it, and that's really the best way to go for the simple ones. The constructs and the ones that take a longer period of time. It's best not to be revisiting them all the time, but over certain chunks of it, you got to go back and check it out. Make sure it doesn't need more juice. You might need to juice it up a little bit. Might need to make a little tweak here and there. So it's really the longer term ones, more complex constructs that require a little. Not necessarily maintenance, but just a little checking in on, and making sure everything's still running on course. Because nothing would be worse than if you, and I actually know this from experience, something in the programming was not correct, and you didn't fix that, and what manifested was what I wanted, but not the way I wanted it. So checking on the long range ones is really the main key there. And I agree with you 100% that with the simple intents, and a lot of magical workings are like that. You don't want to continue to stew on it and doubt it, or be throwing any other energy on it. You want to leave it out there because you just launched it into the soup of creativity, and the universal creativity, and giving that intent in its pure form that sigil represents, and giving that time for the creators to manifest that and send that back. And if you're thinking about it while that's in process, and it's very hard to stay unemotional about stuff, especially if you're asking for something that really is kind of a need and not just a want. It's hard not to go back to that and be putting your emotions about that and about getting it. And for me, that's the death. That's the death of it. It never works once you begin that.
So you would say that it is better in that sense to see it as a want rather than a need, because there's also the perspective, as Bashar may also relate, in a sense, like you can wish for and manifest, of course, everything, but it's also then about realizing that in terms of, let's say, your development seen from your own higher self perspective, while your waking mind may have all kinds of desires and wants, which may, let's just say, they are neutral unto themselves. But then in terms of what actually manifests is that, while in a sense it may manifest what you want, it may even manifest in the way you want, but what will certainly manifest is that which you actually really do need for your own progression. So how would you say, is this best to be approached in terms of mental conception or emotional connection?
Well, I've sort of learned the mindset that the spirit of need is not usually the best. There's an element. I mean, if you can keep it just in the pure mode of, wow, I really need this, without an element of emotional desperation or,
right.
I think when those elements get connected to it, then doing the need can wind up running counter to what you want, rather than giving you what you want. I think when you house it in, like a lot of mine start with my desire for, so that desire is actually picked out, and focused on and congealed and solidified, then that's launched out. Yeah.
Just to clarify, what I believe is that it kind of goes like this. So of course, it's about if you connect emotionally, ideally, of course, it is a positive emotion and not an idea of lack, because of course that would, if anything, just push it farther away. The way it is expressed
Absolutely.
by Bashar, I believe, or the point being in a sense that saying that anyhow what you really need for your progression anyhow will certainly manifest. Understood properly, this can also give you more ease and relaxation, that you actually do not need to stress about anything or worry in terms of lack. If you already know that what you really, really need anyhow is going to get to you. And just as you mentioned, that with things that are, let's say, in alignment with the overall requirement of both the waking consciousness and your higher self. Now, of course, the Crowley quote comes in. The definition of magic is change in accordance with the will. And now, of course, just recognizing whether will is written in lower or uppercase, everyone can look that up. So yeah, just to maybe unravel this idea a bit.
Yeah, in conjunction with will. Yeah. One of my favorites of his too is the art that encompasses all art. Yeah. It really is an art form, and the will, I mean, the will is the fire, that's the energy that drives it out. If you just sit in the world and wait for it to happen to you, I'm not sure, I guess that's fulfilling for some people. That doesn't work for me. It's like it's not like I'm trying to control every aspect of my life, but it's kind of like, you've been given eyes to see, you don't cover those up and not use them and say, wow, I really like my hearing. I can hear everything I want. And I just look at the magic as another one of your senses and your physical abilities. It's as much a physical ability as your sense of touch or smell or hearing or seeing, and it's part of the toolbox that you got to use to make your way through this place that we're in right now.
And it's interesting because you mentioned the eyes in particular. So, of course, I was now about to say, well, you spoke of, in a sense, control. It's not about control. And I was about to say, well, you cannot control anything with your eyes. But of course, then if we understand everything is just observation, then everything is perspective and actually very much is determined by how you look at it. And then the other question, of course, being, when you get the idea or inspiration to do sigils or directed magic or just directed will or change also in your waking consciousness, if you're actually in alignment and close listening to yourself, then this may actually already be, in a sense, what your higher aspect anyhow has asked you to do. So then it's not so much about ego control, but more like listening to what is the appropriate action to conform with the will that my higher self is communicating to me, and am I now resonating on that, and in that sense communicating back that, yeah, I got the message, and yeah, I'm acting accordingly. What do you say?
One of the other aspects of this that I want to make sure that I talk about, I use sigils as part of my own personal cosmology, which is a system that I've gathered over, 50 years of learning and found the pieces that resonate with me. And I don't really ever try to use my sigil work to influence or control other people. I use it strictly for a method of acquiring the physical things that I need and want in this physical reality, and I would just like to make sure that I put out, if you want to use it for making someone fall in love, or hurting somebody, or even helping them. Using that style of magic, unless you're really super connected with them and it's of the purest intent, that magic never turns out well. It usually sigils are kind of crazy in the way that they actually manifest. I've had very, very few circumstances where something didn't congeal that once I sent it off with enough juice. But trying to use that to manage someone else always winds up turning out ugly in the end, and it never winds up being what you really had hoped for. It at least for me, I can't talk for anybody else, but it winds up being exactly what you asked for and nothing about what you wanted. It's kind of crazy. It's like about 12 years ago, I lost a ton of weight, like 160 pounds. And when I first started, I one of my main methods was just walking. And when I was first starting to walk, I would repeat this mantra: I want to lose 120 pounds really quickly. And then at the end of that, and it makes me super happy and healthy, body, mind, and soul, because I started thinking about it with just the first part of that. When I first started, I want to lose 120 pounds really quickly. And then I got thinking, well, the universe is amazing in its efficiency, and the way that it's like water, it finds the path of least resistance and the quickest way to solve whatever the issue is. So if you were saying, yeah, I want to lose 120 pounds, but you didn't give it some sort of method for how that shows up, then you get hit by a car and you lose your right leg. Well, there you go. You lost 120 pounds. That was really fast. Yeah, that's not what I wanted. Oh my God, I lost my leg. So just a little caveat on that stuff too. If you ended up asking for it to manifest in a beautiful way, in a way that puts goodness around, it's always the way to roll, I think, in my opinion.
Yes, so this actually was the Tristram theme from a quite famous video game by the name of Diablo. Maybe you're familiar.
You stumped me on that one, but that was amazingly beautiful. Yeah, I loved it. I was jamming with it while it was playing. I was sitting here on my keyboard playing along with it.
Yeah, maybe the interesting connection may be that this is, again, a quite famous game. There's also, Diablo 2 and 3 by now. And, it's all about this crazy, especially in the third version, I believe, like Nephilim story and like all kinds of crazy stuff, which in my view, of course, turns out to be more and more true, even though it's probably not as depicted in the video game, of course. But all these magical ideas, and, in the game you have runes, you have magic, you have sigils, and all this symbolism. And even the font they're using looks pretty occult, let's say. So it's always just funny, how much popular culture, where it's being relegated to fantasy, we actually have that content. And for me, of course, I always enjoyed it. Diablo may be more of the grim side. You basically walk around slaying monsters and demons. But at the very least, it's
always
on some level.
Yeah,
exactly. At least on some level, it brings you in contact. So I can really relate why so many people and children and so on are drawn to these magical realms on that level. And then it's just amazing to realize that, well, just as, let's say, that particular rune can give you an advantage to your intelligence or your agility or whatever in the game, you can actually use these things in a similar way, align yourself properly, and you can do the very same in this quote-unquote role-playing game, which we call Waking Life.
Well, it's amazing how many things have been have become computerized, where you can just kind of like it's an amusement park ride. You know, it's like this is my favorite example. Guitar Player, that software that lets somebody sit there and look like they're playing. You can't just, you have to practice at that too. So I keep finding myself wondering why they're taking the time to practice to get good at Guitar Player, which is other people's music and a structure that you really can't deviate from, instead of actually taking that time to practice a real guitar and learn how to actually make your own music, and I think the video games, I think sometimes I don't think you use them like this. I think you love the inspiration and the fact that it enhances what you're already working on already. But I think a bunch of people use that as a substitute and think that's the magic, and it's so not. But it does. I love the. I'm familiar with the first version of that, and it really is a kind of fun little escape for a little bit. I mean, who doesn't like to blow up a demon? That's just fun. Yeah.
Yes, totally. It's just like, as always, combining these ideas, or even assisting people to realize, like, I mean, like almost everyone in some way senses is either drawn to fantasy or science fiction or any other realms, and then just, not even judging it at all, but then just, allowing the awareness to seep in that also these are no coincidences. It is all synchronicities. In my personal view, I mean, as long as you're having fun and you're excited about what you're doing and that's what you want to do, and if it's playing games, that's it. Because even here we're playing a game. Everyone has their process, their archetype, their phases, and their alignments. But then just realize, as I said, like, it is just one world. And it seems, and even here, the big joke with all the video gaming and today all the movies or the TV, well, what are individuals actually doing? They are looking, and, I am myself, quote unquote, guilty of this, but I'm quite aware of it. Individuals, especially now with the smartphones, they are staring into scrying mirrors day and night. It is nothing else.
That is so true. Oh, dude, I have thought that myself, and it's crazy to hear you say that, but you're exactly right. It's a world that has them captured in a way, with their glued to that zone. I'm not sure that's a really great area. The 5G thing, they just had the football Super Bowl here a couple weeks ago. And they got the whole 5G network like up and running, so that the stadium was this massive example of how good 5G was going to be. And I've been keeping track of the whole electromagnetic. I live about 10 miles from the stadium. So I had a friend come over and we did an EMF check. We did one about 3 months ago, and the level of radiation from that is the cutoff part for being healthy or not affecting you health-wise is 6. And when we did it a few months ago, this is before the 5G kicked in, it was 152, which is a level already that was an area where you're affecting genetic changes and all kinds of physiological changes, mental changes, like this whole list of things like lethargy, like the inability to focus, long-term and short-term memory scenarios, a very, very significant list.
Well,
go ahead.
No, just very briefly, honestly, seems like many individuals already are suffering from these symptoms without, intense radiation from 5G.
Well, I've read a number of studies. One of them focused on the effects specifically on millennials. And because that was really the first generation that grew up with were born with a phone on their ear and
Right.
that's the a huge part of that generation's world, and those people are suffering some serious the decrease of testosterone, all like across the board things are happening physiologically that are not really good for us. They're not strengthening. They're weakening us in lots of ways. So let me go back to the 5G thing for a second. So it was 156 a few months ago before the 5G. It was 211 with the 5G on, which is just a crazy range, and it's so we're bathed in this energy now that's just inescapable. And I'm 10 miles away from the stadium. I know they have stations set up all over everywhere, but that I can't even imagine what's the concentration of that was in the stadium itself.
Right.
when all those people were using it and part of that network. Pretty crazy.
To stream the video in 4K, right? Because that's so important.
Oh, right. Like, what in the world? Why do we need this? And I've always been just really super leery of utilizing something that was developed as a weapon. That was developed by the military. That frequency of microwaves was put into use by the military as a weapon. And, to now, and there's a really great interview with one of the guys that actually developed that for the government. and he's one of the main proponents of, hey, no, this is not good. The cool thing about it is that there are things that you can do to help minimize it. Shungite, the stone shungite, super cheap. Get a little piece of it. Just keep it on you. When I got my piece of shungite, left it in the house, went out, we did the test. It was 211. Came back in, it went down to 62, which is still kind of high, but it's way better than 211, And I also painted the walls of my bedroom with paint that has that and a couple of other things in it, and it really effectively it takes my EMF reading down into my bedroom at down like 11. Which is, wow,
Sweet.
That's really good. Yeah. And if you think about it, if there's, when you're awake and you're projecting, your energy's going out like everybody else's, you keep a lot of things away from you just in that zone, just naturally. It's part of our natural defense system. But when you're sleeping, you're in your most receptive zone. You're in your physical zone where your body's healing itself and regenerating things and moving things into that. So, if you're sleeping in a room with full 5G, that energy, while you're in that state of receptivity and consciousness, is, I think magnified, several fold. So, having my bedroom coated with it, the downside to that, I guess if you could call it a downside, is it really does cut out all EMF. Like, I can't talk on my phone back in my bedroom. Awesome. No phone calls in my bedroom. Awesome. No computers work back there. It's like a kind of safe zone. So also a good place that's as clean a place as I can find at the moment, to go and do my daily energy scrape, and just get the day's goo off me right after I do my shower. And, so highly recommend. It's not like we're immersed in it and we don't have anything that we can do about it. There are things that you can do to kind of be aware of it. And I'm trying to find someone right now to you can infuse cloth with different things, different chemicals, right? Silver, all kinds of stuff. So I want to develop a line of shungite infused cloth that you can make your clothes out of shungite, cloth that has shungite in it that, gets that down to zero. I'd love to go through the world not being bombarded by any radiation of any kind, if at all possible. I
Oh
mean,
boy, and
I know that's a pipe dream, but it's a good goal to shoot for,
oh, well, not so necessarily. And I mean, this brings up quite a few ideas at once. So, first of all, yeah, kindly mute yourself. Yeah, thank you so much. So, first of all, the idea, of course, I mean, certainly what you mentioned can be done. And I had this, and probably many individuals, similar ideas, and this totally, yeah, shungitely should be done. May be done, especially if it's just cloth, anyone can then draw up their own clothing, which is super amazing anyhow. Also puts a new spin on the whole idea of, the so-called tinfoil hats, where, individuals had always been joking, just like conspiracy theory also is a CIA invented term, tinfoil hat most likely as well. But if you think about it in that way, especially now when you actually have...
I love those hats.
Yeah, but especially now when you actually have, enough studies and even individuals developing it and all these things that are just pointing towards the idea like this is not the very best shit we developed and it's not the very best harmony with the body, which 4G, 3G and so on also hasn't been. But why slow cook yourself ever increasingly, especially if you don't really need it and there's so many issues with it. So
now you can microwave yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a new idea, and also, of course, relates back to my current favorite pet theory to investigate of the Tartarian Empire and the whole generalized idea of medieval clothing and especially also medieval armoring with the chainmail and also with the heavy armor, where there are hints at the very least. If you look at alchemical texts and so on, they speak about the ether quite a lot, which is very interesting. And then, as I understand, only with Einstein or someone, this kind of got relegated to fiction, as so many things did. But the whole theory behind that, aside from the mud flooding and potential resets and, history falsification, which we can even prove within the last few decades has happened a lot. But the main idea here being that there may have been some kind of warfare or weapon or conflict where actually it may have been really useful to have this type of chainmail, because at least for me, it never really made sense to run around with a huge, very heavy sword or these whatever strange things they had, and then being this huge armor, which is super clunky and so on. And of course, also I saw all the medieval movies and it looks nice, but it's neither looks comfortable, nor does it seem like it makes too much sense. To me, it makes much more sense if on whatever level there has been more understanding of the ether, both magically and practically and technologically and consciously. And then, let's say, because also there are images like this where you see individuals basically like old pictures fighting with something akin, which looks like plasma swords or something, or they have swords and they are like connected to a rod and it's, sending out bolts of electricity. Then you have, Zeus and the Vajra and all this symbolism of the mythologies, like, heavy, crazy EM type weapons, basically. And then this also gives at least a different potential perspective as to why chainmail and so on may have been used. And now, in a sense, you're coming back to that because, as you mentioned, that clothing, I was like, oh, that's awesome. It's fun. It's like wearing armor. And it is, right?
Exactly. It is like armor. And, dude, the thing about the 3G and the 4G, those, like the 4G thing, those microwave towers were super spread out. So they,
right.
You could find little creases in the network, if you really were concerned with that, and find places where that was less than others. But we did a kind of not a huge one, but we did a probably 50-mile radius around the stadium, just checking different places, and there was nowhere, the projector things, their antennas for 5G are like super, there's several on a street now, you know. So in a lot of places, they're using the street lights to mount those things on.
Right.
So pretty much that just completely. I found no variance. It was like the same rate everywhere, like
Wow.
not even a little bit.
And
So
just
yeah,
before I forget it, so of course there's the whole question of the LEDs and the type of lighting they use. There's even the whole idea that apparently in the regions that are now quarantined in China, they may have also actually charged up 5G quite a lot in the past weeks or months. So this may of course also be related, because you could easily get flu-like symptoms if you microwave yourself. But what I wanted to mention is that
that's
already
true.
in 2001 there was a demonstration actually by an individual, a German by the name of Hartmut Müller. He demonstrated something called, interestingly enough, GCOM, which in this case would mean gravitational wave communication, let's say. And the way he described it is you use a standing wave and you do the proper science and configuration. And apparently, I mean, this was at a university, so I'm very much assuming, of course, this was correct. Of course, also at the same time, he got defamed, or however you call it, and persecuted. And I heard some crazy background stories as well to what can happen to you if you want to bring forward something like this. And even in this short documentary film you can find online, he's basically explaining what this could do. So it would be eventually could be lossless communication over any distance, including underground and anywhere else, which of course also begs the question whether maybe some factions of the human population, military or otherwise, may already be using something like this for submarines or whatever in some way, shape or form. But that just shows that, at least in theory, and he also mentions this, but it was in practice as well, we have just other ways to approach this thing by just not, only using for now, the way we put it now, the verifiable EM waves, but I would say something akin to standing waves, gravitational waves, if that is a correct term, or scalar waves, where there is quite some science that has gotten into it. And it's just quite curious because this got suppressed in a sense, but it just opens a completely different paradigm, which definitely, should be pursued. And even
I'm hugely into gravity waves. Yeah, man, and they just recently were able to photograph one, and it's that's a really huge area. Maybe that's a whole show in itself. Sorry, I
certainly.
interrupted you.
Oh yeah, sure. No, just basically to point out that there are completely different concepts in terms of how to approach this. There's the most simple idea as well, just to, provide a more complete picture, because also on OKiTALK in German, this is actually one of the somewhat relevant or quite relevant topics as well, just because it's also this idea, of how do you see yourself in terms of consciousness? Are you willing to stand up for yourself? Are you actually willing to look at your own health? Are you willing to look at the technology that you are being handed and actually investigate whether that's so great for you? And again, it hasn't been great till now, but even there's just no point in increasing it if we don't need it. We could just extend fiber optic cables to remote areas and then, glass wire, and you have even better speed and you have no EM radiation to that degree, especially if it's properly shielded and properly done. And, also with current tech, I assume even if we would use this current type of EM wave and electricity, which I assume we could use completely different system, which would be much more harmonious with the human body anyhow. But even if we were to continue using that, I'm certain it could be modulated and relegated at least to frequency bandwidths where we know that it is the least harmful to the human body. And it just appears that the way this is being pushed, while it's always only incremental, it is just not going in the right direction. Although it also has to be mentioned, as you said, there are many tools we can use. And also, of course, never forget that the brain emits an electromagnetic field, which of course, then in a sense is also a receiver. So maybe influenced by these type of waves to varying degrees, also the DNA as well. But then also realize that, of course, the heart, as I understand, has a 1,000-fold stronger EM field than your brain. So it tells you kind of who's calling the shots, but also tells you that if you're properly aligned and so on, then this can also really charge up and most definitely simply provide you your own energy bubble, where at the very least you may be less, potentially even not at all affected by it. However, I would, of course, in this case, or personally, see a dual approach. So I'm not getting a 5G device, continue promoting alternative ideas and theories just to investigate. But at the very same time, staying centered. So you're actually not putting yourself off balance and remain in a harmonious and reinforcing wave within yourself, which then certainly would at least have these negative ideas affect you less. So in a sense, as they always say in the Bible, sometimes like to quote it, do not fear, never forgetting that as well, of course.
On the dual approach, I wear the shungite. That's a physical thing. I wear that on my left side of my body, in my pocket, in my pants. That's where you're at. If you're right-handed, that's the way energy flows in and then flows around out through your right. So I put it in the place where your energy receptors are strongest. But, that doesn't take it down like to nothing, So to compensate for that, part of my daily grounding and energetic cleansing that I do is like after you flush all of that off, you bring up a fresh batch for the day, and part of that you can extend out as your own little energy shield, and it's super effective. So I would say that relying on just the shungite or the paint or any other outside thing alone is never the way to go. Just like your physical body, dude. The immune system is over the top crazy, man. It is an amazing system. White blood cells that are running around taking out stuff that's not good for you. I have a good friend who does blood analysis work, and I did some photography for her about a month ago. And while I was over there, she said, "Well, let's do you." So she sets me up, and we're looking at a singular drop of my blood under a really high-powered microscope, and man, seeing where things were healthy, and wow, there's a little bit of plaque, and so wow, there's a singular little parasite, which just was unnerving to see this little parasite swimming around trying to chew on my corpuscles. It's like, okay, so there were little dietary supplements I was able to take to kind of alleviate those things. But you realize that being healthy and keeping your own responsibility for your energy body, which also has an immune system of its own. I mean, your energy body's your software, your physical body's your hardware, and the totality of that is you as the computer. So your energy field has an amazing immune system too, and part of that, just like you eat the right stuff and you think of your body as the complex machine that it is, and you feed it the materials that it needs to function at its fullest. And usually when you're in that zone, you don't get sick, you bypass a lot of the stuff that's out there floating around. And dude, I go to the grocery store to pick up my stuff, and there's a woman there yesterday just coughing and wiping her brow because she had a fever. I'm like, wow, man, there's hundreds of people in this store, and it's just like, so all of that's in the air all the time, but you are a really amazing piece of technology, physical and astral, and when you give your body the help it needs and feed it what it wants. It's curious, when I lost all that weight and I just kind of naturally got off of stuff that had sugar in it, I didn't realize at the time how much of a drug sugar actually is. It affects your emotions, it affects your energy level, it affects all kinds of the functionings in your brain. And pretty much the things I craved when I was in that zone were sweets and carbs, and I wanted more of that. And about 6 months into the weight loss thing, after I had really flushed all of that out of my system, I noticed that I would be craving different things like Brussels sprouts. Oh man, I need some spinach. I gotta have some broccoli. And it was like my
Right.
body was telling me what nutrients it needed. And when you listen to that and you can hear what it actually needs instead of what it's addicted to and craving, I could instantly feel like, man, it just like had this wonderful effect on me, and just kind of like charged up that part of me again. So I think that as always, starting with yourself, and keeping that house in order makes everything else easier to manage as well.
Yes, I very much agree. This is how it is. So I, of course, also have my own personal regimen of different things I quote unquote supplement my body with, and just maybe to reinforce the idea of the wondrous piece of technology we are, in a sense, in terms of a vessel to have a particular experience. The heart is not a pump, and the blood may actually be more like plasma. And then again, we are in this strange field of things we supposedly don't understand, but may actually be very much composed of, that may have, or obviously have, very many quite miraculous properties. And it's really great to get more of a feel for that. And certainly, just as you mentioned, offer your body, like raw food, organic food, potentially some supplements, and really see how you feel. One thing I recently really got into is also something super simple, but self-made mustard. And I was like, oh my God, this is so good.
That's
And of
awesome.
course,
That's awesome.
yeah, and of course it's chock full of, selenium, and, then you have these daily values and so on, which personally I don't care so much about. I think it's more about the resonance, although some people, of course, may need a lot of certain ideas over time. But it's just amazing. And then you just, you get a new sense, you get a new feel for your body, and also in terms of your, now the proper wording for your sense of taste. And yeah, a whole new different world opens up, and as you are the proof of that as well. Yeah.
And you get a sense of what it's like for your body to function, at the level it was designed to, instead of like doing things that like it has to work around. That feeling is pretty amazing. And rather than being addicted to sugar and that kind of crap, I'm addicted to that feeling now. And when you can get to that zone,
Exactly.
it's way easier to maintain and continue on with.
Exactly. And then it's almost like, while I also still at times, like to eat a small piece of whatever cookie, which may not be the best, or anything, even some bought sweets, but the main difference being, there's been a time where every evening I ate a whole box of, like bought low quality chocolate cookies, which, was good, but it's just, giving you the sugar type rush. And then when you realize more and more states and so on, and you get in the zone more in terms of your own optimum configuration for nutrition, then that is the addictive thing, because it's much too obvious that if you really cross yourself with that, and I'm always wondering about people who are struggling with this, because for me it was so clear as soon as I realized this, latest by eating almost only raw vegan food for a month. And I was like, okay, I'm never going to go back. I may still eat whatever other things at times, but as a main idea, that is just too addictive, because I feel too light and too good. And this is just too effective for me as a general mode of living. And also there is too little excitement in the sugar rush, which anyhow, as a child on this planet, most likely you've had for many years anyhow, because that's what you're being offered constantly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was a monster for a whole bag of double stuffed Oreos. Whoa! Man, once I got started, I could not stop either. So it's good not having that stuff around and
Yeah,
just, you know, yeah.
that's how they're designed. And as always, I like to mention, once you get into raw vegan sweets and really get into it, and your body adapts a bit to the raw food or to higher quality food, it just tastes better and it's even good for your body. You can't really overeat, and you also don't want to. So it's amazing.
You know,
There's always a way.
I grow my own pineapples, and
Sweet. Well, Florida.
oh wow, dude, I mean, that's dessert to me now. And tasting a pineapple that actually gets ripe on the plant, that's not been picked like a month before it was ready, and then it sits there and ripens while it's getting shipped, to let it get that really gold, like, oh my god, thing, and put that thing in the refrigerator, crack it open, and those bites, it's just like good sushi or anything else, man. You take that bite and you go, oh man,
exactly.
You can't even help it. It's like amazing. So that's the kind of sweets I'm addicted to now. That much better.
Maybe just to drive home the point in a sense, because we've been talking about EM and all of that, and here of course comes in the whole idea, all these different processes in your body. Anyone can investigate by themselves. There's many different aspects, but even just the basic idea that there is a voltage in a cell, and there are certain ingredients or compositions in organic foods, some also found in properly made supplements. But just like you mentioned, your body recognizes that, and it recognizes the energy contained and the current. So the electrical charge. This is actually the correct wording in this sense. So we are also an electrical system. So that really shows you how we can just directly input energy, and then of course again strengthen your own energetic field, which can make other things much easier. And maybe if you agree to once again bring it back to the other quote unquote political side, which I would say is also very much related to the magical and the consciousness approach, is that in this whole idea it's also very much about quote unquote finally speaking up, speaking your own truth, and really taking care of your body.
Not sure how that relates to the political aspect of it.
Well, in terms of, in the one sense, is the body that is, then at the very least economical, and may also become political in terms of what type of food actually is being grown, in terms of what is being bought, if individuals actually look at it. And
I see.
And the political side quite in a quite discreet manner. And this is happening, all over the planet. And even in Austria, there are at least 2 small townships now, I believe would be the word, where they actually put a ban on 5G because people actually got informed, not only from, heavily funded industry sources, but actually looked at some research, or at the very least, there have been for quite some time individuals that are very sensitive. There may be, many cofactors to this, but radiation certainly also is a factor in this. And, even just in terms of awareness and consciousness, look after yourself, look after your neighbors in that sense, have an interest that everyone is healthy. And that then, in a sense, has to become political as well, because if you are not standing up in terms of consciousness and then culture and then politics, you're just kind of, this is just getting rolled out over you in a sense. So I see this also as a quite potentially pivotal point for human consciousness, where, the main politicians or industry, also in Austria, they're just pushing this relentlessly. There is no question.
It's cheap. The technology's cheap, and they make an assload of money off of it, man. It's when about 6 months ago, I was on a real soapbox about this, because I was very, very concerned. Every single piece of information I was finding was like, wow, this is bad, and I found a bunch of congressional testimonies from really well-respected doctors and research that went down. That's where I was telling you about. I saw that the list of things that are affecting millennials and the population at large, really credible people putting forth information that at the very least should have spurred oh, let's hold up on this a little bit and let's investigate this a little further before we roll this out. But they just got steamrolled, man. Nobody wanted to hear it because there's too much money involved. There's too much
Right.
cash to be made. So I don't know that you can, I don't know that, I'm not sure exactly how to fight that, because that's such a powerful driving force for so many people, that changing that mindset, not always that easy. The other night, this weekend, I did some amazing fungus, very blue. It was really great. And in the middle of the evening, I was ruminating upon the fact that, each one of us, they talk about the multiverse, in quantum physics. Well, we are a physical multiverse because there is an entirety of a universe in each one of us, and everybody is walking around their own separate universe. And, I was contemplating how much of the reality that you're personally immersed in is just you, that you're the only one that can perceive that, and outside people outside of you, get pieces of that and chunks of that and relate to it energetically on more or less levels. But nobody but you is the totality of your universe, and I start trying to keep your own universe really in top shape, and you emanate that energy not because you're trying to influence anybody, but because you're influencing yourself and changing your energy field. It's kind of infectious, and for me, that's the most optimistic. I think politically regulating things, I think, I see a lot of scenarios right now that are happening that are just so authoritarian and like, oh, you've got to think the way I do. You've got to say what I say. You've got to use the words I use. I think that's bullshit. And it really angers me, and just the nature of who I am. When I get approached with things like that, I make sure I do exactly the opposite. I can't help it.
Right. Yes.
So I think when your energy is really emanate, okay, the weight loss thing, I about 8 months ago, I'd kind of put on some. I'd fallen off the wagon a little bit, put on some, and I'm back down to fighting weight again. And it's really funny, the neighbors, I go for a walk every night around the neighborhood, and some of the neighbors are like, well, dude, I've noticed you lost weight. What'd you do? Most of the time I just say I got lucky. But the people that really want to know, I shared my method and encouraged them to find some methods of their own, because it is really unique. What works for me is not going to work exactly the same for you or anybody else, so I think it's on each of us to discover our own perfection or in that zone. But I noticed this weekend neighbors were out, and a bunch of people have started losing weight, and there wasn't any lecture or you have to do this. They just saw something they liked, and that's what they attached to. So I think in my mindset, that's the way to change minds. It's not by wagging fingers or demanding anything. I don't think demanding anything gets you anything except shut down ultimately, and creates a polarized war of conflicting ideals.
Yes.
So I think when your juice is flowing out from you in this mode that people like find delicious and like, wow, man, I want some of that for me. I think that's when real change can start to happen. Then, or at the moment of absolute calamity and like everybody's at the edge of losing their lives, people are pretty malleable about making some changes at that point too.
Oh yeah. I mean, and at the very least, we certainly have the perception right now for more and more individuals that may be the case. And yeah, it is.
You know, and I think when people start emanating that, and I know you've experienced this, but when you're putting out that vibration, you attract those like-minded people to you in just really miraculous and synchronistic ways, you know, and then all of a sudden you've got a network, and then the network spreads, and then that spreads, and then all of a sudden you have
Exactly.
a movement of things that are happening, not because they're being forced down anybody's throat, but because it's really organic and obviously a good way to go that makes people feel good, you know?
Right.
So,
And you may be familiar with the so-called 5G space appeal. Also, OKiTALK is on many shows. Just now I heard from In Power Movement. For those being in Australia, they're going to do a webinar on this idea. And it is just what you described. This is how it becomes political as well, because the idea being, you know, no matter how strong the 5G transmission antenna is or whatever, we are much stronger antennas active on many, many more layers. So in a funny way, it's almost like also recognizing that there is a communication there, because we are also active on these levels. And what may turn out, in my imagination, to be quite interesting is that as this dawns on more and more individuals, and they say, okay, I can be affected by these unseen frequencies, it's quite well proven. Well, what other, but maybe positive unseen frequencies and different states of consciousness may there be if, in a sense, you know, 5G, let's say, quote unquote, is proving we are pretty much etheric, right?
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think? If we want to go for another round, if we play some more music and then come back once more?
Sure, I do have I've got something I wanted to revisit a little bit with you and flesh out a little bit.
Definitely.
So,
this is the Wizard of Odd, episode 8 with Bryan.
Awesome cut, man. That was an amazing piece of music. I love that.
Oh yeah. So where are we, Bryan? Let us know.
Well, I wanted to go back, just revisit something we kind of touched on a little bit ago, and that's, you know, I was amazing the other day just thinking about the science fiction writers. I was a voracious reader when I was really young, and like I read all of Heinlein's stuff like 5 or 6 times, Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, of course, George Orwell, a bunch of those guys. And you look back now, even going all the way back to Jules Verne. You know, you look at when Jules Verne wrote about going to the moon. I mean, that was just a crazy impossibility, like the ravings of a wild creative mind, but bared no resemblance to something that anyone thought would ever really happen. And you know, that's happening in so many ways, you know.
Well, it's certainly, I mean, happening in many different ways, and we can always ask the question, of course, you know, again, what is real, what is science fiction, and just, you know, in terms of upholding my own stance of providing different perspectives, just as we've been talking about these electromagnetic ideas, plasma and all of that, what everyone can see, it's hosted on YouTube. It goes by the name of 1965. So the year 1965. Scientist claims the moon is plasma. Uncut. Retrofocus. Hosted by ABC News Australia. Nice. And that's pretty interesting. This is R. Foster. Apparently his work then kind of got, you know, lost, as so many things get lost. But what's really interesting is he seems very genuine, very sincere, and at the very end is talking about, you know, basically the directive of truth will always, you know, point us where we need to go. And what he says, which is an interesting idea, is that he says it would be possible, according to him at least, to land on Mars or Saturn or something. However, it would definitely not be possible to land on the moon because it's made of plasma. And he's asked about it, and he says, well, by now he doesn't even feel scared to come forward with this anymore because the evidence is so overwhelming. So I'm not, you know, don't have to debate this now, whether this happened or what this all is or means, but just also to show here there is very different perspectives on these ideas.
You know,
And yeah,
I would not buy into the plasma idea. I mean, I think it was a good concept, but dude, you know, you can with a high powered microscope, you can or a telescope, you can see the actual landing sites on the moon and see footprints. And I mean, we actually went there. It's not a lie. And you know, it's kind of hard to say, well, yeah, I believe it's plasma when, you know, we brought back
well,
rocks.
yeah. Well, the issue here being, and I assume we would have to do maybe even roundtable discussions on this, because I have investigated both sides quite a lot. And all I can say is, looking at the totality of information available, looking at the processes involved in terms of how it was supposedly done, how it was recorded, the artifacts that remain, the fact that NASA claims they can't do it today anymore because, again, they lost the technology to go to the moon. All this strangeness, again, not here now to debate it or say this or that is right or wrong. However, I just want to say that there is very much information or evidence that can point towards many different directions. It's certainly an extended rabbit hole that may be investigated. And I believe, as I am a very, very big proponent of question everything fundamentally, especially if it is not something I can definitely prove myself, although of course what you mentioned with the microscope is another interesting aspect, but to just eventually, as with all things, all theories, all deliberations, and again, everyone can only decide for themselves, and who knows, maybe there's parallel realities where right now, where for some of us living here, this happened, they went there, and for some others, it was, you know, made in a Hollywood basement, but whatever, right? We don't need to agree on this right now. Just again to say that there's varying perspectives and plenty of evidence for both.
You know, I think you would get a kick out of this. I enjoyed watching this myself. Did you ever hear of a show called The Mythbusters by any chance? That was a real popular show. Yeah,
hold
on. Yeah, there's they did a show where they took all of the moon conspiracy things and recreated all of those. I feel like the flag waving and some of so, you know, there's a whole list of them, but there's like 10 or 12 of them that are kind of like the top things that people use to illustrate that point. And every single one of them, they were able to just recreate in their own little laboratory there. It's kind of interesting. Called Mythbusters and the Moon Conspiracy. Check it out. You'll enjoy watching it. It'll be a hoot. It'll be another perspective to add to the list.
Definitely, and it is, in any case, let's just say it is layers upon layers. I'm not gonna go down this path anymore right now at this point, but probably we're gonna come back to this at some point, maybe have some more guests with also some more detailed background knowledge, because in the end, you know, also for me, and also having these conversations with you, although anyhow on the main things we agree anyhow, and even though also this would not be a requirement, but ultimately what it is all about is that we're able to communicate different viewpoints clearly and in love, and then just ultimately
and respect for other people's points of
exactly.
view. You don't have to be wrong for me to be right to myself, man. And I, you know, it's not a right or wrong scenario. It's like, based on the information I have to this date, this is my opinion, you know? And I mean, when you keep it in that mode and you're not invested in being correct or you know, then it makes it easy to hear. I enjoy hearing the other points of view. I want to investigate those points of views myself and see if I come to the same conclusion. I always invite that.
So in this, for now, we're just gonna leave it at that. All I can say is there recently. So you mentioned one video, and just another one that I saw quite recently is by a guy called, before he was called Esoteric Detective, now the YouTube channel is called The Outer Light. And just recently he released a 1-hour video where again he's going over many different indications, many different ideas in terms of, you know, lighting, camera, the artifacts they display today, which supposedly have been the lunar landers, and so on and so forth. So just basically for now, we can leave it at that, which is so individuals who want to investigate can at least have two sources that would have opposing viewpoints. And then, you can have a lot of fun with this from there. And as always, I would say, also in terms of the magical approach.
I want to get started right now.
Yeah. In terms of the magical approach, I guess what we can also certainly agree on is that it is all about perspective. However, you wanted to bring up something else, I believe, as well.
Yes, I was just going to, I was thinking back on the science fiction guys and George Orwell, specifically 1984. And, that is, we are living in that world right now. If you think about the 5G thing and the way China's utilizing it, they've got cameras on every street pole. They're like recording people. They worked with freaking Google to come up with this facial recognition stuff. And now they have like a social rating that every person gets every day. And depending on how much of the party line they're pulling, their rating goes up or down, and the social rating is used in order to be able to just buy basic services, food, to get public transportation, and it's like if you have a negative view of we're family, you and I are brothers, you live in another place altogether in China, but you have made derogatory remarks about the regime, then that guy's social rating goes down, but your social rating also goes down as well. And it's like, wow, man, this like, it's like the ultimate big brother. Every single thing that you do, every single thing that you buy, and they're quickly getting to a point where people will be inserting chips and doing stuff, like right now. Well, dude, I have an absolute concrete example of that right at the moment. One of my oldest friends and a really super good apprentice, his son he's like 21. And when he was 18, he'd always had kind of speech problems and some difficulty learning scenarios, but they didn't really know what was happening with him. So when he was about 18, he started exhibiting epileptic seizures and different kinds of seizures. And as it turns out that there were different places in his brain that were firing and causing different kinds of seizures. So the diagnostic process was extremely difficult, and finding a treatment that could help him was extremely difficult because the seizures were never the same. They'd either be a grand mal seizure, from this one thing, or like 2 or 3 of the other ones that fired and created this unique effect. So make a long story short, they wound up discovering that, yes, it was in fact epilepsy, and they were able to connect with a surgeon who's got this new technology that is proving to be super, super effective. And what they did was they inserted long electrodes into different centers in his brain, and then put him in an observation room, and he stayed in the hospital for a week, and he went into several epileptic seizures while that was happening, so that they were able to map the exact position of where those things were coming from and what was usually the initiator of the seizure. So as it turns out, and the hopeful, optimistic thing about that treatment was if they could identify it specifically enough, they could surgically go in and remove those faulty cells, and it would bypass that altogether, and he would have a permanent cure. He would no longer have that. But as it turns out, the initial strongest one was in his speech center, which made the operation not viable. So the next best thing, and this is what they just got through doing this weekend, is they inserted an electrode, a long wire down into that section of the brain, and they mounted in a little chip in his skull covered it over with a piece of, they like cut a little sandwich and sandwiched in this chip into his skull. And now when he has seizures, it reads back information to the chip and really defines his specific process, and then that chip responds and moves things to other areas. So he's like the bionic guy already, man. And it's like, wow, I don't really want to be connected like everybody's connected on the internet all the time, dude.
And honestly, just very simply put, like, is this really something like the proper dose of, CBD oil, lifestyle changes, getting maybe somewhere which is not poisoned by radiation, but more like the rainforest, would not potentially even cure? You know what I mean? Like, there's other options certainly available. That's at least my impression usually.
Yes,
and then
yes.
You have the cyborg route, or you have a more natural or even magical route. And where it comes down for me is that all the promises that are made in terms of, 5G and, you can become a cyborg and then you upload yourself and so on. Honestly, and I don't mean it in a demeaning sense to anyone who likes this. And also I'm super into cyberpunk and science fiction and whatever. It's all awesome and fun. And at one point, I even saw a version of myself in the mirror that actually was somewhat of a cyborg future type space pirate or something. I'm cool with all of these realities. But the thing just is that once you understand your eternal nature and all the, basically, it's just as you mentioned, and really understand that you already have the highest grade hardware and software, which you can even upgrade and allow to debug and really debug. I mean, again, it's all the same terminology.
Yeah, exactly.
What is this, with the parasites and all of that, how it relates to nutrition and everything and lifestyle and beliefs and all of that. So there is probably quite little we would need or really need to use in terms of external technologies, as indigenous are proving to us each and every day, where we may adopt these practices again and then still use tech. I love tech. Use it in a smart way, use it in a way that is harmonious with our body, and really get to know our own tech, which we got incarnated into, and then we most likely will be able to solve many things quite effortlessly and without so much investment and time needed and all of that. Because as much as I'm happy if these things can help someone, it just does not seem to be very sustainable to me. And these are all the technical parts. They can have faults or whatever, and other inputs or who knows what additional EM fields and so on. And it always comes back to the question, I would say, as well, as whether you believe you need something external, even permanent, technological, whatever, to sustain yourself. Or even in your case, I mean, again, you may be a good example in terms of weight loss and in terms of potential diagnosis for diabetes and so on and so forth, as you had mentioned in one of the first shows as well. You could have, I guess you're not using, how do you even call it, a syringe every day, right? Which other people by that point would have been doing for many years, no?
I gave myself insulin injections for the first month. And that's now 12 years ago, and I've never had to do that again, ever.
Well, here you go. For many cases, in many views, and then we can still differentiate type 1, type 2 diabetes. Again, there is the great movie by Dr. Gabriel Cousins, Raw for 30 Days.
Yeah, type 1 is a whole different, I was type 2 diabetes, which
just to point this out, because again, on this Dr. Gabriel Cousins movie, Raw for 30 Days, available on YouTube in all kinds of languages, by a doctor who's kind of I was about to say this, but no, I think he's just kind of trained in a, let's say, Jewish type tradition spiritually, and also very much knowledge in terms of health, and then combining it with consciousness and nutrition. And what turned out, and you can see it in the movie, is that so basically all these individuals eating raw, they get off their drugs and so on. Out of the 8 or something, 2 quit because they just can't take it, or they can't take the detox, or they don't want anymore. Everyone else comes out looking 10 years younger, super healthy, changing their diet, as you say, vibing it off into their family and all of that. But then even at the very end, this is just kind of left as an open question. But to me, because I have absolute faith in the body or in the parallel realities, quantum science, that any state can be achieved, especially of perfect health for any human, if you, find the right path for you. at the very end, basically, they say that one of the guys also quit his insulin completely. Yes. And they go check him up again after the fact and kind of, at least this is how it comes across, realize that he would actually have the genetic incurable type, more likely.
Yeah,
but still he doesn't have to use it.
Diabetes 1, right?
Yeah, but still he doesn't use the insulin anymore, as far as I can gather. So even here, I would very, very much assume, for many different reasons, and also just because it's, again, huge cash cows, that oftentimes we are being told something cannot be cured, or it's super expensive, or, throw billions. I mean, how many diabetes funds are there, or whatever other
Well, dude,
things?
the range of diabetic medicine. I have a friend out in Iowa, man. Dude, he's a really bad diabetic, and he got really overweight, and like the diabetes, they had him on like 6 different fucking diabetes medicines. And the thing about that is that they build those things to work on your pancreas, okay, deal with that. Well, they do a lot of research into how that affects your pancreas, and it may actually push things in a good direction that way. But I've yet to see a pharmaceutical that didn't have side effects, that something else didn't take a hit because you were giving it this artificial thing trying to push this in this way, when what you really need to do is alter your behavior, and to use your energetic processes to rejuvenate and keep yourself healthy.
Yeah, precisely. So I'm not sure how we got down that rabbit hole now, but please continue if you still know where you wanted to lead it.
Well, that's a subject I could go on for a long time about, because it's very near and dear to my heart. It's like beating that, dude. When I went to the hospital, it had been a long, slow period of just getting fatter and fatter, and my depression getting deeper and deeper. And man, you wind up at this hopeless, just awful space. And at the end, right as I went to the hospital, my brain was stopping to function. My body functions were acting all wonky and weird, and I couldn't think. I could bear just taking one step in front of me was horrible. Dude, I weighed 368 pounds, man. I was carrying out a whole nother person on myself, So by the time I actually got to that space, it goes back to the thing I was laughing about a little while ago. It's like right at the edge of destruction is the place where you give up enough to like actually make some changes, And man, the feeling of getting out of that, and then that about 2 weeks after that, when I had started the change, I got on it right away as soon as I got out of the hospital. And dude, I have a needle phobia. I've always, I've never injected myself with anything, and would avoid getting injected with anything, like with everything I had. So, I'm in the hospital. I'm getting shots like 8 times a day for 3 days, and then I get out of the hospital and I've got to like prick my finger like 5 times a day, and then give myself when I first got out, I had to do it 4 times a day. And that was just like, oh my, nothing like immersion therapy to get you over a phobia. Now I don't give a shit.
Yeah,
needle, whatever, man. Come on, get over with it. Yeah, but man, after I went about 2 weeks, and I'm like getting consistent energy, the fog in my brain was lifting. My eyesight was going so hard, man. And that was one of the ones that really scared me, man, because that's critical to my world, being able to see with my eyes and paint and make things, and man, I'm like looking at the screens or whatever I'm doing, I can't really read anything. It's like, oh man, this is horrible. And when that started coming back, man, the addiction to that feeling was just so like, wow, okay, I remember how it felt to feel good. Oh Nice.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, man, it just was, they talk about the vicious circles, the downward spiral, but there's also the joyous circle and the upward
The virtuous
spiral.
cycle, yes.
Yeah, man. And that one is just so delicious to ride on,
And
and yeah, where the other one, saps your energy and takes, it kind of eats you in a way. The other one just like it feeds you. So it kept me so juiced up all the time. That's when I started that like 2 hour sleeping thing, because I was just having so much fun. And then when I got off when I went I had to go for weekly doctor visits. And as the doctor's going, wow, man, after that first month, he's like, you don't need that insulin anymore. Why don't you get rid of that? It's like my blood sugar just went from 650 down to 105. And I'm like, wow, oh, okay. It does work, and it wasn't just that there was a lot of magic done for that too. And that was my first real connection with my teacher. And I give him, immense credit for magically helping me get my zone on the road, and then I followed through in spades with the things I needed to do myself to maximize those things. And then as they start, just like with anything, it starts off slow, but then it exponentially increases. And man, don't want to revisit that spot again. I call it my Jabba the Hutt days.
And
Yeah.
maybe just to briefly mention to anyone potentially struggling with these ideas, because you said you remember what it's like feeling good. And this isn't, again, not to blame anyone, because, we've been conditioned for a very long time, probably, but at the very least for generations, trauma, all of that when I made quite a few changes, I would say in many ways, I even felt better than I ever did. Also, because as I said, you're basically getting,
Absolutely.
treated, as they say, with sweets, and usually not the best kind, from a very young age, usually. So already there's even though you have very high energy, of course, as a child, but already there it's probably a detrimental or more of an interference. And when you just are quite strict.
Midwest comfort food, man. Wow. It'll kill you.
Yeah, right. And so when you really do a radical shift and really also investigate your own culture, like what is, in America, I believe they call it the SAD diet, standard American diet, but it may be a bit different, in Europe, or in also very much, of course, depending on your individual family culture as well, and what those are familiar with. I had some advantage as my parents had been in the business of making food. So even though it was, normal diet, at least it was, high quality and, varied and so on. But even then, when you become more strict and really realize what is really charging you up, literally, again, we're at the electricity, and remove all the things that could interfere, like heavy metals and so on and so forth, then, you can potentially even, in a sense, reach the highest state of awareness or energy that you could ever consciously remember. So it's amazing, and certainly one cannot repeat this often enough. It is a whole new world. It is, as you also alluded to, seeing the world with new eyes.
The thing about diabetes 1 and diabetes 2, if you're born with diabetes 1, that's I have several friends that have had that, and it comes with a whole set of things that you have to deal with most of the time for the majority of your life. Diabetes 2 is usually, not all the time, but usually a function of your own choices that you make for yourself, and consequently is, when you change that set of choices, you change the conditions that the disease needs to grow and take hold, and that's infinitely curable. That's the thing. If you're suffering from that, just know that doesn't have to remain, that you really do have a choice in that scenario.
Of course, just as one sentence, I'm of course a proponent as well that even many, if not all things that are now supposedly incurable can either be greatestly alleviated, if not even quote unquote cured as well. That is my personal opinion right now, of course, but also here much more and more evidence is showing up that, let's just say, we have even more freedom of choice and potential to heal than we may have allowed ourselves to believe so far. Again, all about
and as the involvement of the magical consciousness that's going on now happens, and more people get the ability to actually use their energy to heal people, then healing ourselves will be a very common thing, and we'll be able to do that with our own natural energy rather than outside pharmaceuticals or technology or anything like that. I'm really looking forward to that space as well.
Yes, me too. And again, I think it all relates back through whatever strange ways of, chaos and order and maybe even some
yeah, right.
not so preferred also suffering in a sense, as we had mentioned. But who knows? Certainly, if we are quote unquote keeping the faith in ourselves and, the universe, the creator, ourselves, however we want to put it, then I'm quite certain all of these things can ultimately pan out very positively. Just as even I heard, just one small example, that the fires in Australia, again, many causes for this, many theories behind this, but that ultimately it seems they revealed quite some interesting structures that had been hidden below the bush, and who knows how many underground tunnels and so on and so forth. Who knows where that awareness and recognition may lead us as well. So similar things apparently have happened with the whole thing of like stuff melting somewhere around the ice caps, strange structures being revealed and all of that. So there's, as always, several sides to an idea. And as I always like to say, the most important thing is important if one chooses to, is to be able to remain neutral and balanced, as we also mentioned today, and then just allow yourself to interpret whatever happens in a positive way, so that at least you individually in your own reality are allowing yourself to see the positive side, therefore gain the positive effect. And in terms of consciousness dynamics, and it is also my experience, really appears as if then you're even able to be entirely unaffected by any potential negatives. So, as always, absolute self-empowerment. The magic is within each and every one themselves.
Hey, while you were talking, I just got the most intense push to say one more thing about the diabetes thing, because I think there's somebody out there that could hear this and like really help them. So I'm going to throw it out there, and whatever happens. I think one of the things people struggle with the most when trying to build a diet for themselves that's healthy and that they can sustain over a long period of time, like all these diets, it's like you can't be on a diet because at some time you're going to get off the diet and then it goes back to exactly the way it was, usually worse. So one of the things that helped me the most was I realized how much of my world was constructed to the cultural and social connections and functionings with food. Let's go celebrate. Let me have some comfort food. Oh, I'm depressed. I need to eat. Let me have 2 bags of Oreos. Yeah, that'll make me feel good for about 3 seconds.
Right.
So I think that this mindset that food is connected to your emotional body is
Oh, yeah.
faulty. And that if you can shift that perspective when you start having those impulses, and you can shift that perspective to looking at your body as a machine and think about, okay, what fuel do I need to give my car here? I know it sounds like a really simple thing, but had huge implications for me and continues to, and that's a mindset I continue to water and foster for myself. And I've seen a number of other people adopt that point of view. And it's like people ask, well, how'd you lose weight? Well, I gave up sugar and carbs, and they're like, oh, I can't do that. I could never do that. Well, yeah, you actually could. The only reason you can't is because your emotions are attaching that to other things, but not the real purpose of why you're consuming stuff.
And just to continue on that line, and thank you for bringing it up, because what often comes up, as I understand it, is that the excess fat, there may be some type of, positive stored fat, I can imagine, though most individuals don't have that. And it's more like, toxins being stored away to basically ensure that the blood or the plasma remains within the right levels of alkalinity. That also, it would then, in a sense, first of all, of course, you're heavier, but also that it's potentially insulating you in a certain way. And that this is also potentially decreasing your reception. And this may also be a reason why many individuals are engaging in it so much, because then, and I would like your opinion, and especially how you feel as you had quite a lot more weight, and I assume fat as well, and what the shift was for you. You mentioned the positive sides, but also that, and it's also what I felt, and I never weighed nowhere close as much. The highest difference I got in my own personal weight was 10 kilograms, which I had more and now have less. And even here, I felt quite a drastic shift. And then also with eating patterns, in terms of, it's not so much the comfort food anymore. You're more looking for the energy food, but also that food itself is almost creating like, and there's even proof for this, that it's creating like a type of a shield also in your body. Here, although it doesn't need to be through sugar or, like, say, this excess fat, it could also be like just through good fats, that the metabolizing of that actually is creating some kind of feel-good hormone. So you can also do that with, let's say, good coconut oil. But I assume this is what many individuals are also feeling, that they want to kind of shield themselves, and because they don't have, let's say, better options for food within their awareness, or no conditioning on that path whatsoever, that this is then what ends up in obesity and diabetes. What do you think about this relationship, or how has it changed for you?
I think that's very, very crucial. And I think one of the critical elements for me, and this has been one of my life lessons that I've had to deal with and continue to deal with, is my emotional connection to my weight. And I've had a number of experiences in my life that were really traumatic and really like thermonuclear bombs in your world at that moment. And my weight I would immediately start gaining weight, whether I would be doing the same exercise routine that I've got. I'd be eating the same way, but in a matter of like 3 or 4 days, I put on like 10 pounds. And that's very bad, and that's one of the reasons I was eating crap, and at a certain point you get so fat, it's just like, fuck it, let me have what I want, but my emotional devastation manifested physically in this insulating layer of flesh, that I think there was some part of me that felt like it needed that for protection, and
right,
and to wrap myself up in that. And I think that's the case for a lot of people, and that's something that has improved for me over the years. It's interesting, as you learn your lessons, the core ones. I think each one of us are kind of like born with a set of things that you need to look at throughout the course of your trip here, and that was definitely one of mine, that to work on that. And when I first started, I'd be dealing with this one mammoth thing. So I got pretty decent at dealing with this one mammoth thing. Then you get two mammoth things. Okay, I'm really good at that, ditching that off. Okay, now it's four. Oh man, I just got one recently that was like six different things all hit right at one time. And I'm like, all right, this whole quiz thing just has got to stop. It's kind of like as your lessons, as you learn your lessons, you get the next grade level, and the tests that go along with that. And happily, I did put on a pound, but that was it. And I'm like, wow, awesome. So I really felt like I made some progress in that direction, which feels really good. It's like you go to work on that stuff, not knowing really whether you're having any success in it or not, but, knowing that it'd be really good if you did, So having gained some ground and territory in that area was really encouraging, and sort of blew some wind in my sail to review my conviction towards that, and moving that in a even better. I would love for my emotional state not to be affecting my physical body, I don't want to add a 160-pound fat layer to myself to protect myself. I can do that other ways. I know how to do that just fine. It's like this holdover from how I was born, and maybe some of the way I was raised, but certainly. Man, one of those life issues that I've addressed over and over and over again. So, I think that insulation thing is very, very true. And, one of the other things about food that's happening right now is like everything's genetically modified, and it's like the wheat thing, the individual grains of wheat are now bigger, but they didn't increase the really nutritional part of it. They increased the outside carb part of it, so it's like what they made bigger was the stuff that doesn't really work for us, which is why I try to stay in non-GMO and organics, and keep it simple, and not put food in. Like, I don't know about you, but once you kind of lose that weight and you shift your emphasis from that being a way you celebrate or interact with people, or all the host of ways you use it, that you find yourself not really wanting to eat as much. And I find myself not hungry like I used to be, and cravings kind of go away unless I really need some specific vitamin from some vegetable or fruit or something, that I need to eat. My body lets me know about that, but I find myself just naturally not eating as much and not wanting to eat as much. And, I'm really I think I'm the oldest I've ever been, but I think I'm like in the healthiest zone I can really remember in my life. And it's sustainable for, the rest of the journey, which is really cool.
Yeah. And then, of course, just to reinforce that idea again and again, we're only made of cells. And, there's more and more evidence that even these ideas supposedly that are only degrading over time, like telomeres, may be restored, may be supported, may even be lengthened. Of course, again, if there is enough juice, enough energy, enough frequency available to be received by the body from, the higher mind, or however you would want to call it. And then, you're just making new cells. So it may very well be that, seen from that perspective, your new cell is younger than the cell you had until, well, of course it's younger.
Your cells, your cells regenerate every 7 years. So by the time, if you started a practice and you stuck with it, by the time 7 years is rolled around, you're completely regenerated in your new mindset and your new physical outlay, with cells that are reacting to those things. And dude, people can say just little cells, but that universe has consciousness too,
Right.
So it's not like it's devoid of intent, like your blood, dude. What's the most programmable substance in the world, water, and that's what you're made up of 70%. You know,
well, as I understand, even more if you look at hydrogen itself, I believe it's actually 97%.
well, there you go. So, I mean, that's a vessel that's just waiting for the proper programming. And then all those cells react to that intent and that desire. And that's the way they function then, instead of being damaged and hurt, especially if you're damaged and hurt emotionally and dealing with that, and that's the input you're sending to your body and your cells, which is what I was doing, you know, you're recreating damaged cells again. So
Yes.
the new you that's you in 7 years is even more damaged than when that began. So, you know, I think that's a really critical part to that whole process.
Yes, I completely agree. Well, for today, we already got 2.5 hours, so it's up to you.
I think I'm good.
How you would like to proceed?
I think I'm
Awesome.
good. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, then all I can say is it's been a blast as always. And, you know, as waves travel through the ether, as I just gathered, you may actually be invited to another podcast, which may also be hosted here by our dear friend Guy D. Craft, who just also started doing shows. We also interviewed him for Team Rabbit Hole. Really amazing individuals. I'm very much looking forward to you, the both of you talking as well. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of fun. So, yeah, looking forward to that.
That'll be really great to look forward to. So I just want to leave on a little, you know, I'm riding this creative wave. You know, the ocean always gets really sweet for me, from like the winter solstice to the spring equinox. And every year there's just like this creative inspiration that happens. I'm about to finish up my mudra oracle deck. This
Oh, sweet.
yeah, and I'm including a bunch of the Jinsen Jitsu signs with that. I think you'll really love that. It's going to be a really, really fun piece. And I've just been in love doing this light painting scenario right now, that I'm just having the best time. And it's like this combination of my actual pushing paint around on paper or canvas, and the art of photography, and those things combined together. And I've just found this new area for myself that's really very exciting and fun to explore. And I've got another deck that is getting developed utilizing that technique as well. I've sent you a few of them. I've got another batch of stuff I'll send you too. Oh, and I shot a couple things that, you know, you had asked for some images. I should try to get those to you later today. I shot a couple things I thought you might be interested in taking a look at, and see if they flip your switch. And if anybody's out there looking for a tarot deck, you know, wizardofod.com. Both my decks are available there now, and that's Wizard with a Y. So if you want to help the cause, I'd love for you to join the family.
Exactly. The link is, of course, so wyzardofodd.com. And the link, of course, when there is a description, is always included as well. All I can tell everyone, check out Bryan Lahr, Wizard of Odd's page, take a look at the images, and let me know if these are not one of the most, you know, amazing, high-tech, in the very best sense there can be, tarot depictions you've ever seen. So, well, thank you as always.
Thank you, Raphael. It's always a real treat to do this, and I'm very, very grateful. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So, well, much love and joy to each and every one. Enjoy yourselves, and we're going to catch you next time. Thank you once again, Bryan.